We've seen uprisings in this country and right here in the state of New York against police brutality and racial inequality. Thanks to your courage and your persistence in taking to the streets and making calls and sending emails, the New York State Legislature passed a package of historic police reform bills. Now, these bills don't solve everything, but they are an important first step in our march towards justice, and we wanted to take some time to tell you what these bills do. We repealed a law called 50A here in New York. That law shielded police misconduct from public view and also hid their disciplinary records from the public. So if you were a victim of police abuse, like I was a couple of weeks ago in a protest, you would have no idea whether that officer had a history of abusing their power.
His nose is bleeding.
The officer that murdered George Floyd had an extensive history of police abuse, but we were only able to find that out because they made disciplinary records public. Prior to us repealing 50A, we would have no idea. And while these records make police misconduct public, it protects officers' personal mental health records and other things that should remain private. This law is about police accountability, so now the public can hold bad actors accountable.
Okay.
Firearm.
Okay. Don't reach for it then. Don't pull it out.
We see people killed at the hands of law enforcement and there are no consequences. So we created 2 new offices to begin to restore trust and hold officers accountable. One is the Office of Special Investigation, which will be a permanent office that looks into incidents where an officer has taken an individual's life. The other is the Office of Law Enforcement Misconduct Investigation that will look at patterns and practices of law enforcement and make recommendations to change.
Don't touch him! He's not resisting! He's not...
Low-level and minor offenses are the major source of interactions between law enforcement and communities of color. But until now, we had no data on how these offenses were being enforced. The Police Statistics and Transparency Act would require courts to keep that demographic data so we can pick up on any patterns that suggest that we are being racially profiled or anything else that needs to be rectified. The STAT Act would also require police departments to report arrest-related deaths to the state every single year. I can't breathe, a phrase we are all too familiar with because too many people have died in a chokehold at the hands of a law enforcement officer. No police officer should be able to choke someone to death. And if they do, they should be held criminally liable. The Eric Garner Anti-Chokehold Act does just that. It bans the use of a chokehold throughout the state of New York and moves it up to a Class C felony because everyone should be held accountable and those who use the chokehold should be punished under the law.
I'm gonna tell them there's an African-American man threatening my life.
Please tell them whatever you like.
We've all seen the story of the woman in Central Park who called 911 on a Black man threatening to weaponize the police against him. But the sad reality is, this is not a unique story. And what this bill would do is give members of a protected class legal action against anyone who files a false report with 911. Our community should feel safe, and 911 should only be used in a true emergency. Law enforcement officers are trusted with firearms to keep our public safe. But we've seen instances where they've misused this power and caused injury or tragically the death of individuals in our communities. Regardless of whether an officer is on or off duty, this bill requires them to report if they've discharged their firearms within 6 hours and follow up with a written report within 48 hours.
Look. He didn't even do nothing.
Police brutality isn't new. It's simply being recorded much more often. Many of the instances that have motivated us to take to the streets were only made public because brave civilians took video on their camera phones. What many people don't know is that here in New York, your right to record was not protected by law. So the New York Right to Monitor Act protects your ability to videotape police interactions and protects you from having your device seized. Whether it's someone screaming out they can't breathe or an individual laying on the pavement bleeding through their ears, we've seen too many instances of someone needing medical attention and law enforcement doing nothing about it. This bill would require law enforcement to render medical attention or get medical attention for anyone that is in need or requests it.
What's in your other hand? Let me see your hand.
Put it down.
What's in your hand, dude?
Here in New York City, we already required the New York Police Department to wear body cameras, but the New York State officers were not. We are now requiring every single New York State officer to have a body camera as well, so that we can have a true record of police interactions with the public. These laws are an important first step, but our work is far from over. More transparency and accountability are first steps in our march towards more justice. One thing remains clear: taking to the streets works. Protesting works. Calling your legislators works. And standing up for Black lives works. I'm State Senator Zelnor Myrie. Let's keep marching.